Hello and welcome to our next video in this topic on transporting plants. Last lesson we looked at the structure of a plant stem and we spoke about the importance of the xylem, the phloem and the sclerenchyma fibres. Today we're going to look specifically at water transporting plants, which happens in the xylem as we discussed in the previous lesson. So by the end of today's lesson you should be able to explain how the root is adapted to absorb water from the ground. You could be able to explain how water moves through the plant via the symplast and apoplast pathways, and you could be able to explain the difference between transpiration and transpiration stream. Now before we get onto the difficult stuff, I want to just quickly go over two key words that we're going to need, okay? The first one is osmosis. Osmosis. Now, you've probably heard this till the cows come home. However, osmosis is the movement of water particles from an area that is more dilute to an area that is more concentrated, okay? So, osmosis is the movement of water particles from a more dilute area to a more concentrated area. Now we can say in terms of A-level biology, or you'll often hear this, you'll often hear that it's said in this particular manner, is this idea of water potentials, okay? So we can say that it goes from a high water potential to a low water potential. So we can just add underneath here, and I'm going to put it in red, that water moves from an area of high water potential to an area of low water potential. Okay, so we've got so far that osmosis is the movement of water from a dilute area to a more concentrated area, and we've also said that water moves from an area of high water potential to an area of low water potential. The other key word that I just want us to define before we do anything is the word cohesion. Okay, cohesion. Now, cohesion in this sense can be defined as water molecules form hydrogen bonds between each molecule, causing them to stick together. So what we get is all of these water molecules sticking together due to these hydrogen bonds between them. If you think back to when we did the biological molecules topic, we spoken about dipoles. Okay, we spoke that water molecules have these dipolar nature and therefore they stick together, creating what's known as cohesion. So these are two key principles that we need to think of today. And before we move on to talking about how water is transported in plants, I want to use a more simpler analogy to explain it. Okay, or to sort of get your mind moving anyway. So I've been on Google and I've found the most high-tech diagram of a young boy drinking his drink through a straw. Okay, now ultimately, if you think of somebody drinking through a straw, the solution or the liquid that they're trying to drink is held in the cup. They need a way of drawing this liquid up the straw into their mouth so that they can swallow it. In order to do this, the boy sucks on the straw. When he does this, he changes the pressure inside of the straw and the water molecules nearest his mouth move in. Now, when these water molecules nearest his mouth move in, because water or solutions tend to be cohesive, this drags the next water molecule in and the next one and the next one. So long as he is sucking on the straw, more and more water molecules or liquid molecules are drawn into his mouth. At the same time, the cohesion effect is having an effect, but also osmosis is taking place. The water molecules or the liquid molecules move into the areas where there's less of them. Therefore, they replace the water molecules in the straw lost as they move into his mouth. So we can just say that when we suck on a straw, a change in pressure causes liquid nearest our mouth to move into our mouth. To move into our mouth. So when this boy is sucking on the straw, let's assume there's water in here. When he's sucking on the straw, the water molecules that are pulled into his mouth first enter. These water molecules drag the next water molecules with them due to cohesion. You don't suck up a single water molecule at a time. They're all stuck together due to cohesion, and this creates a steady stream of liquid moving into his mouth. So we can then say, and I'm going to put it in red, that due to cohesion, multiple water molecules are pulled into the boy's mouth or the person's mouth following the original water molecules. Following the original water molecules. Okay, so when he sucks on the straw, the water molecules nearest his mouth are pulled in because he changes the pressure inside the straw. This causes the water molecules that are stuck to the original ones to be drawn up the straw. Okay, this is due to cohesion. At the same time, osmosis will want water molecules to move into the straw where there is a lower water potential. Okay, so we can just put, try and fit it here, osmosis moves water into the straw due to it having a lower water potential. So we've said that when we suck on a straw, we're changing the pressure inside the straw. That causes water molecules to move into our mouth. These water molecules drag other water molecules with them due to cohesion. This cohesion also works along with osmosis. Once you suck water out of a straw, there is a lower water potential in the straw and osmosis wants to take place. The water molecules want to move into the straw. Now you're probably sitting there thinking, why is he using this as an analogy? This is exactly how plants transport. Look at that, it's almost like I've planned this. This is exactly how plants work. We get transpiration. Transpiration is the loss of water from a leaf. When the stomata of a leaf are open, water is lost from inside the leaf. The cohesive nature of water drags water through the leaf from the xylem, which pulls more water from the xylem, more water from the xylem, more water from the xylem. So this acts like a straw. This would be like the boy's mouth being up here. So this is the equivalent of the mouth being in the atmosphere and the drink being in the soil. Okay? We're sucking the water through the xylem out of the leaf due to transpiration. Okay? So I'll just give you a second to get any of that down while I have a quick drink of water. I then need to refresh the screen. Remember, you can pause the video at any point if you're stuck. So let's refresh our screen. So our next key word is the word transpiration. Okay, transpiration. So transpiration. Now transpiration can be defined as the evaporation of water from a leaf. Okay? Evaporation of water from the stomata of a leaf. Okay, so when water evaporates from the stomata of a leaf, we call that transpiration. One thing that is really important to state here, and I'm going to put it in red, transpiration is a passive process. The plant does not have to put any ATP into it. Transpiration uses the energy from the sun, therefore it's passive. The organism does not need to do anything for it to take place. It will take place on its own. So we can say transpiration is a passive process as it uses energy from the sun. Energy from the sun to take place. Okay, so when water is lost from the leaf of a plant, this is not a passive, not an active process. It is passive. It uses energy from the sun to evaporate water through the stomata in a process known as transpiration. Okay, so if we think back to GCSE, and I just take this image, And we can paste it in here for us to have reference to it. We don't want it that big because I need somewhere to write, don't I? If you can't quite read it very well, you can have a look at it on the PowerPoint. Ideally, I'd like to crop that because it's a bit too big. How can I do this? What's this button? So if I crop that out. Oh no, that's not what I wanted to do. No. I do apologise. As you know, I'm a bit of a technophobe. I literally have a play with this just so I can do your lessons. I should have perhaps done this beforehand. Yes, I like that. Oh no. We'll undo it. There we go. We'll just leave it like that. So if we're thinking about the structure of a leaf, the stomata are found at the bottom. Okay? So we can say that if the humidity in the atmosphere is less than that in the stomata, we've got a water gradient. If we've got a high water potential here, so I've got a high water potential in the spongy mesophyll, and I've got a low water potential in the atmosphere, water is going to want to move out of the leaf. Okay? So we can say, in fact I'm going to use this colour, we can say that if humidity in the atmosphere is less than in the stomata, comma, water will move out of the leaf via osmosis. Water will move out of the leaf via osmosis. Okay? So if humidity in the atmosphere is less than in the stomata, water will move out of the leaf via osmosis. It will go from a high water potential to an area of low water potential. Okay? Now, depending on how easily this water moves out is how open the stomata is. If the stomata is closed, water cannot leave. If it's open, more water can leave. If it's open wide, even more water can leave. So we can say, and I'm going to put it in red because it's important, changing the size of the stomata determines the plant's rate of transpiration. So changing the size of the stomata opening determines the plant's rate of transpiration. So the bigger the stomata is open, or the wider the stomata is open, the faster the rate of transpiration. Now, if water is lost from these air spaces here, water then moves from the spongy mesophyll out into the airspace. So we've got water being lost from these air spaces into the atmosphere, which the water then lost from these air spaces is replaced by water from the spongy mesophyll. So we can then say that the loss of water from the airspaces into the atmosphere is replaced by water from the spongy mesophyll, or from the mesophyll cells. Okay, so when water's lost from this airspace to the atmosphere because the stomata is open, this water in the airspace is replaced by water from the mesophyll cells. So we've got water going from the airspace out into the atmosphere, and then we've got this water being replaced from the mesophyll cells, because if water's lost from the airspace, this airspace now has a lower water potential. Therefore, water moves from the mesophyll into the airspace. Just check that we've got everything down that I wanted to write down. So this is all about creating a water potential gradient. Okay, so we can say that water potential gradients cause water to leave the airspace, in the leaf and be replaced by water from the mesophyll. Okay, so it's this movement of water from the airspace into the atmosphere that causes water to move from the mesophyll into the airspace to replace the water that has been lost. Okay, so if we refresh this now, we've got to the loss of water from the mesophyll. Okay, now we need to think about the movement of water up the stem in the xylem. Okay, so the water is lost from the mesophyll due to heat from the sun. Okay, so we can start by saying that transpiration causes the loss of water from the mesophyll. Okay. Now, due to cohesion, water forms a continuous column that's pulled across the mesophyll and down the xylem. Okay. What I mean by this is I want you to imagine, and this isn't going to be the best drawing ever, but I'll have a go. I want you to imagine that we have got our xylem here. This is not an accurate representation, it's just to demonstrate something. We've got our xylem here, and at the top of the xylem we've got our mesophyll. Okay? If H2O is being lost due to transpiration from the mesophyll, because water is cohesive, this will cause water to be sucked up the xylem, much like when we drink water through a straw. Because the water is sticking together, because water is cohesive, the loss of water at the mesophyll drags more water molecules up the xylem. Okay? So we can put, I'm going to put it in red, due to the cohesive nature of water, comma, when transpiration happens due to the cohesive nature of water, when transpiration happens from the mesophyll, it pulls more water up the xylem. So this loss of water from the mesophyll pulls water up the xylem, okay? This is known as what's called the transpiration pull. Transpiration pull. And that's our next key term. Transpiration pull. We can define transpiration pull as the pull of water, up the xylem due to the loss of water from the mesophyll. The loss of water from the mesophyll and cohesion of water. And cohesion of water. So transpiration pull is defined as the pull of water up the xylem due to the loss of water from the mesophyll and the cohesion of water. So essentially, when the mesophyll loses water via transpiration, cohesion causes this lost water to drag more water up the xylem from the roots. This is known as a transpiration pull. Okay? Now, it is incredibly strong. Transpiration pull can pull water over 100 metres in the tallest trees. So this evaporation of water from the mesophyll can cause water in the xylem to be dragged 100 metres. If you're a Canadian redwood and you're hundreds of feet tall, that's very, very useful. So we can just put here, and I'm going to put it here because I need the space down here. You can put it underneath if you wish. Can pull water over 100 metres in distance. Okay, I do apologise, I'm going to have a quick drink. And I am going to have to refresh the screen anyway, because I need to add a bit more after this. So we're just going to carry on with this, but I do need to refresh the screen. Apologies. Now, this theory of water being dragged up the xylem due to the loss of water in the mesophyll is known as the cohesion tension theory. Cohesion tension theory. Okay? Now, cohesion tension theory can be defined as the idea that the hydrogen bonds, between molecules of water allows water to flow upwards. Remember, we spoke about this last lesson. Water only flows upwards in the xylem, through the xylem against gravity. Through the xylem against gravity. Okay, so cohesion tension theory is the idea that hydrogen bonds between molecules of water allows water to flow upwards through the xylem against gravity. And you need to, for A level, know some evidence for this. So we can put here evidence includes ... We got, first of all, that during the day when transpiration is at its highest, the trunk of a tree is smaller due to negative pressure in the xylem. So we can put that during day the trunk of a tree is smaller due to negative pressure in the xylem. Due to negative pressure in the xylem. Next one, our next piece of evidence is that if air enters the xylem, the tree can no longer, or plant can no longer draw up water. That's because there is a break between the water molecules. So we can just put, and I'll explain it a bit more, air bubbles in the xylem stops the transpiration pull. Now, what we mean by this is if you've got two water molecules together, they're all sticking together. Okay, so these are my H2O molecules. Whereas if I introduce an air bubble in the middle, so there's my water molecules, here's my air bubble, these ones are no longer stuck to these ones. There is no cohesion or no hydrogen bond here. So this stops these water molecules dragging these ones along. So this is my air bubble, and we can just add in here no hydrogen bond. So this stops them sticking together and therefore stops cohesion. The final piece of evidence that we need to talk about, and I think it was this colour we were using, isn't it? If we cut a xylem water doesn't leak out. So if it was under pressure, if the tree or the plant was putting the xylem under pressure and we cut the tree in half, water would leak out from the trunk. But of course that doesn't happen. So we can just put that a cut, that's really annoying that that's not the same colour, and I'm a bit OCD about these things, so you're going to have to wait while I quickly find the colour. So cut plants do not leak water, indicating that the xylem is not under pressure. If the movement of water was due to the xylem being squoze, much like blood is squoze through your veins, when we cut the tree or the plant, water would leak out, but that's not the case, okay? So we've spoken thus far about the loss of water from a leaf. We've spoken how that loss of water is replaced by water being drawn up the xylem. The final part we need to talk about is how water moves into the root. So if we can refresh this, change this back to black, as always, and I want a white pen. So, water enters root hair cells by osmosis. So, water enters root hair cells via osmosis. So the water in the soil is in a high water potential, water in the root hair cell is in a low water potential. So water moves into the root hair cell from the soil, okay? At the same time, minerals are moved into the root hair cell or into the xylem via active transport. This lowers the water potential of the xylem. So we can put, and I'm going to put it in red because it's important, minerals are actively transported into the xylem from the soil, lowering, it's not how you spell lowering, is it? Lowering the water potential of the xylem. The water potential of the xylem. Now, to help us envision this and look at it, there is a diagram on the PowerPoint that looks like this, okay? And we can paste it in. I've taken this from a revision guide, I think. Oh no, that's not what I want. I want to paste. It looks like this. Okay, I'm going to make it smaller. You have got a copy of this on the PowerPoint for you to use as you may wish. If we have a look at this diagram, you can ignore these bits. These are bits that I coloured out when I pasted it onto my PowerPoint. If we look at this, it shows a root hair cell. It shows the cells that are found between the root hair cell and the xylem. So the xylem's here, we've got what's known as the Casparian strip, and we've got cells that separate the root hair cell from the xylem. Okay? So water takes three pathways from the soil into the xylem. So water can take three pathways from the soil into the xylem. Okay. The first one is what's known as the symplastic pathway. Symplastic pathway. Now the symplastic pathway is where water simply moves through the cytoplasm of cells. Okay, that's shown by this orange line here. The water just moves through the cytoplasm of cells into the xylem. So we can just say, for the symplastic, water moves through the cytoplasm of cells. Water moves through the cytoplasm of cells into the xylem. So we've got water moving via osmosis into the root hair cell, and then through the symplastic pathway, water moves through the cytoplasm into the xylem. Okay. The next one is what's known as the apoplastic pathway. This is shown with this sort of pinky line here, okay? The apoplastic pathway is when water moves through the spaces between the cell membrane and the cell wall of each cell. So there is a tiny space between the cell membrane and cell wall. Water can move through this in what's known as the apoplastic pathway. So we've got apoplastic pathway.